Man, this Cable and Stuff guy is so stupid. Covering all these obscure artists that nobody gives a shit about, like M. Nolayak, T-Stone, or Death in June. Like, isn't that guy a Nazi? Why doesn't he talk about the true greats that everyone loves and appreciates, like Pink Floyd? I mean, I guess you're in luck because I've been on a huge Pink Floyd binge as of late. I don't know, y'all are weird. Hey everyone, it's Cable here, and yes, it is time for the video that every music YouTuber succumbs to at some point. That being the Pink Floyd Worst to Best. Obviously, a few months ago, Anthony Fantano did his Pink Floyd Worst to Best, which was something that I never thought would happen at this rate, given how he kind of stopped doing those videos for 7 years at this point. But it is neat that he did it, and I guess it inspired me to do my own take on this subject matter. So, yeah, let's just jump right into it. Let's not dilly-dally. You all know who Pink Floyd is at this point, so, yeah. Well, okay, maybe I should explain who Pink Floyd were. Now, Pink Floyd were a progressive rock, art rock group from the late 60s and throughout the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. And throughout their career, they've put out 15 studio albums. And in this video, I'm going to be ranking all 15 of those albums, yes, even the soundtrack albums, from worst to best. So, without further ado, let's just jump right in. Okay, coming in at lousy number 15 is an album that you all probably expected to land this low on the list. That being their most recent album, and probably their last album, 2014's The Endless River. Now, this album took me a good while to actually get around to, mostly because I just didn't really feel compelled to listen to it from front to back. It's purely instrumental except for the closing track, Louder Than Words, and honestly, it just feels kind of there, I guess. That being said, I do think the album is overall pretty listenable. It sounds great for what it's worth, and as background music, it's perfectly fine, but it's definitely inessential in the grand scheme of music consumption. Okay, next up at number 14, we got 1987's A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which is definitely the most dated sounding Pink Floyd album out of arguably their entire discography to some extent. Now, this album came out after Roger Waters left the group and David Gilmour took hold of the band and basically became their de facto frontman. Now, I believe these songs were originally planned for a David Gilmour solo album, but they were retooled for Pink Floyd. And yeah, it definitely sounds like it's a David Gilmour solo album. And like I said, it sounds pretty dated on the production end. You could tell this album came out in the 80s. There are some good songs on here, like Learning to Fly, One Slip, and I also think the closing track, Sorrow, is pretty good, but I do feel like it's improved upon greatly on live albums, specifically their 1995 live album, Pulse. But yeah, as far as the rest of the album, I can pretty much take it or leave it. I'm not really a huge fan of the Dogs of War or Yet Another Movie. They just feel kind of there. But yeah, the only reason I'm putting this higher than The Endless River is because I just feel like the songs themselves are, for the most part, a bit better. But it is still an overall pretty mixed bag. And speaking of mixed bags, at number 13 we have the band's first of two 1969 albums, that being More. Now, like I said up front, this album is a pretty mixed bag. There are songs on here that I really enjoy, like Cymbeline and Green is the Color and the Nile song, but there are other songs on here that just do absolutely nothing for me. I feel like as a soundtrack, in the context of the movie, I feel like these would work just fine, but as a standalone album, it's pretty inessential. I can definitely see why some people would choose to skip this album in the grand scheme of Pink Floyd's discography. There are some good songs, like I said, but yeah, overall, I would only recommend it to hardcore Pink Floyd fans. Okay, coming in at number 12, we have 1983's The Final Cut. Now, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with this album. On one hand, I do respect it and admire it on a lyrical basis, as Roger Waters pours his heart and soul into many of these tracks that have to deal with war and the overall consequences. My biggest issue with this album that has admittedly died down over the years is that, from a musical standpoint, there aren't really that many highs like there were on the preceding album, The Wall. It just feels like they took all the low points off of that album and made an entire album based off of said low points. There are moments that click for me, like The Gunner's Dream, the title track, and my favorite song off the album is actually the closing track, Two Suns in the Sunset, mostly because I just find it to be a rather pleasant-sounding track with a neat saxophone solo at the end. So, no, I don't hate this album like some people do, but I also don't think it's one of the band's best albums, hence why it's landing this low on this list. At number 11, we got their other 1969 album, Ummagumma, which is a pretty interesting album because it's a double album, with one half being live performances and the other half being these experimental pieces. And as far as the live disc is concerned, I think it's really amazing. Like, these are some really great live performances that I would definitely recommend anyone who is a fan of, like, early Pink Floyd check out if they haven't listened to Ummagumma. As far as the studio album portion, which takes up disc 2, it's pretty hit or miss. There are some interesting moments that I respect more than I enjoy to some extent, although I do really enjoy The Narrow Way, which is a pretty rewarding song on the whole. But yeah, overall, I just feel like this album is pretty good on the whole, especially if you consider the live portion. But the studio portion, I can take or leave for the most part. At number 10, we got their 1968 album, A Saucerful of Secrets, which is a pretty interesting album for me because, on one hand, I do enjoy the songs themselves, but I feel like they are made far better on live performances. I'm specifically talking about the song Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun and the title track, both of which appear on Ummagumma, and also appear on this other live album that I may talk about in a future video, but we'll see what happens. There are some songs on here that I do really enjoy, though, like the opening track and the closing track, which is Syd Barrett's final contribution to the band. And overall, I just don't really see myself returning to this album all that much. It's overall good, but it's definitely not really one that I'd see myself returning frequently. Next up at number 9, we have their 1972 album, Obscured by Clouds. Now, this album tends to get pretty overshadowed in the grand scheme of things, mostly because it's sandwiched in between two pivotal albums in Pink Floyd's entire discography, those being Metal and, of course, The Dark Side of the Moon. Now, Obscured by Clouds is the album soundtrack to that of La Vallée, and I would actually say this album's pretty underrated on the whole. Like, there are some songs that I'm not huge on, mostly the gold it's in and the closing track, which is just overall pretty good, but not really amazing. But the run of tracks with What's the Deal, Mudmen, and Childhood's End are all really fantastic and rank as some of my favorite Pink Floyd songs. Overall, I just feel like this album has an overall low-key vibe to it that I just find myself fascinated by to some extent. Like, it's nice to see the band kind of chill out for a little bit in between all these expansive albums that explore many different sonic territories. And yeah, I just really enjoy this album. I don't care what anyone else has to say. Coming in at number 8, we got their 1970 album, Atom Heart Mother, which is another interesting album for me because I do really enjoy it, but there are some quirks about it that I'm not huge on. Like, I feel like as a package, it feels kind of all over the place. The opening title track is really great. I really enjoy the more orchestral vibe that they go for with this song. And the other 4 songs that take up the second half are all really good too. I especially enjoyed Fat Old Sun in Summer '68. And I'd even say that the closing track, Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, is pretty enjoyable. I mean, if you removed like the sound effects of like people eating food or whatever, it probably ranked as one of my favorite Pink Floyd songs. So overall, I'd say Adam Hardmother is a pretty great album. It definitely showed where the band was headed towards with their overall sound, but I do feel like they hadn't stuck the landing just yet. At number 7, we have what is probably the group's most divisive album, that being their 1994 album, The Division Bell. Now, I'd say, as far as like the production is concerned, this is definitely a huge step up from A Momentary Lapse of Reason. It doesn't sound of its time, if that makes any sense. And I will give The Division Bell this as well, as to why it's landing pretty high on my ranking. I think the songs, for the most part, are all really great, and while there are some low points that I could take or leave, like A Great Day for Freedom, and also Wearing the Inside Out, there are some amazing songs like Poles Apart, also the very U2-esque Take It Back, and the closing track, High Hopes, is definitely one of my favorite Pink Floyd songs. Like, I know I said this album is pretty divisive on the whole, but I think most people can agree that that closing track is really amazing. And a good swan song for the band if you discard The Endless River. And, yeah, I think The Division Bell on the whole is really great. I personally really enjoy it, even though there are some weak songs. I think this is definitely an album that you should definitely peep if you're curious. Next up at number 6, we have the band's debut album from 1967, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Now, as far as debuts are concerned, this is very different from the Pink Floyd that we would know from like their run of albums during the 70s. As this is way more leaning in psychedelic rock and psychedelic pop. And I'd say that of the psychedelic rock albums of its time, I think Piper at the Gates of Dawn is definitely one of my favorites. It has some amazing songs like Astronomy Domine, also the 9-minute long Interstellar Overdrive, and generally speaking, the first half in general is really amazing. And while I'm not like super crazy about songs like, I don't know, Chapter 24, they make up only a small portion of the album, and overall I just really enjoy this album, and if you haven't heard it yet, definitely check it out. Okay, and now we are in the top 5, the 5 Pink Floyd albums that I think are the best of the best, in my opinion at least, and coming in at number 5, we got their 1971 album, Metal. Now, Metal to me is probably the best Pink Floyd album that showcases their more jammy side, especially with one song in particular, which I'll get to in a bit. But I really enjoy the first half of the album, especially One of These Days and Fearless. I'd say that the stretch of songs from like A Pillow of Wind to Seamus is pretty chill, similar to how Obscured by Clouds was. And I really enjoy that for this album. And the closing track, Echoes, is honestly like top 3 Pink Floyd song for me. Like, it is like unreal levels of amazing, in my opinion. And generally speaking, I think the flow of this album is something that goes a bit underappreciated. Like, I feel like the flow from song to song is overall pretty seamless. Granted, that might just be because I've heard this album so many times that I'm kind of accustomed to it. But overall, I just really enjoy this album. And if your only Pink Floyd exposure is with their Big 4 albums, the first album that you need to check out after those Big 4 is definitely Metal. Check it out. And speaking of the Big 4, coming in at number 4 is their 1979 album, The Wall. Now, I think The Wall is a really amazing album, but I can definitely see why some people wouldn't be as keen on it. Similar to The Final Cut, it's pretty theatrical, but I feel like unlike The Final Cut, this album has the songs to back it up for the most part. Like, Songs like Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, Hey You, Comfortably Numb, Young Lust, In the Flesh. All these songs are like really killer, and even though there's no like hint of like the band's jammy side on like the previous 2 or so albums, I feel like the songs themselves are overall pretty catchy, and they definitely leave an impression on me. As for rock operas, this is definitely one of my favorites, and it's definitely one of the albums that I would recommend people check out first if they want to get into Pink Floyd. And with that, we now enter the top 3. These are my 3 favorite Pink Floyd albums as of right now. And coming in at number 3 is their 1977 album, Animals. I'd say out of all of their albums, I think Animals strikes a nice balance between the very poignant lyrical side as well as the band's more jammy side. Like this is definitely an album that you could tell that Roger Waters wrote all the songs, but you could still feel like it's a band effort to some extent. And I just think this album on the whole is really amazing. Like dogs, pigs, sheep, especially sheep, are all really amazing. And I think the bookending tracks with Pigs on the Wing Part 1 and 2 are very lovely and make this album feel less despondent than it would be otherwise. And I know I don't really have a whole lot to say about this album, but I feel like everything that could be said about it has already been said to some extent. I just think Animals is like a really amazing album. It may not have any obvious radio hits or like really any radio hits at all, but for what it's worth, I think this album is amazing. Taking the silver medal in the Pink Floyd Worst to Best is the band's 1975 album, Wish You Were Here. Now, on some days I think Wish You Were Here is Pink Floyd's best album, and for good reason, because I feel like this is their most personal album. It definitely deals with themes of like isolation and loneliness, and also just commemorating Syd Barrett as a whole, especially with the 9-part Shine On You Crazy Diamond. I think that song in particular is like really incredible, as well as the 3 middle songs like Welcome to the Machine is incredible, Have a Cigar is incredible, and obviously the title track is very amazing as well. And yeah, I feel like on some days, like I said, this would be my favorite Pink Floyd album, but you already know what number 1 is, so let's just get to it. That album, of course, being The Dark Side of the Moon from 1973. Really, like, what else needs to be said about this album that hasn't been said a million times over? It is the quintessential album, like, really ever. Like, the way this album flows is immaculate. The way this album is produced is also immaculate. It may not be as jammy as, like, Metal or Wish You Were Here or Animals, but I feel like the songs themselves are still very catchy, and they still have an atmosphere to them. Like, if you listen to the first half of this album especially, you could just be engulfed in, like, the overall mood and atmosphere that the band is going for. And I just, on the whole, think this album is just really incredible. It really is one of those albums that gets people into music, and I think that's really amazing. Okay, that's all I have to say for this video. I hope you all enjoyed watching me ramble about Pink Floyd. And if you want to post your ranking, feel free to do so in the comments. And yeah, that'll be it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.